Hi, Andrew Cuneo here with another Alchemy video. This time it's on my Zombies deck Splashing White. This is a deck that when Crimson Vow came out in Arena, I made a video about this deck in Standard, which I'll put a link to. The basic conclusion from that video was that the zombies are pretty good, but you need to branch out a little bit beyond just black, I think, to get enough good cards. And by going into white, you can get some good cards, and by adding a few vampires to your deck, it actually improves things. So I'll put a link to that video, but basically the conclusion was it's good to play Welcoming Vampire and Henrika in your zombies deck, which is a little bit unintuitive, but that's what I found. I didn't wind up playing this deck that much in that Standard because it was kind of weak against the Is It Epiphany decks. But now with Alchemy, even though this deck didn't get any great new cards, it got a couple new additions, which I'll go over. But more importantly, none of the cards in this deck were nerfed, and the Epiphany decks were nerfed. So I think this deck's probably in a pretty good place if you're playing in Alchemy. And if you want to get into Alchemy, but you don't really want to have to craft a ton of stuff, there's only a handful of Alchemy cards in this deck, and I would say they're not even vital to the functioning of the deck. They're just fun things to try out. So with that, let's go through the deck and look at the Alchemy cards and then get into some games. So one of the strengths of this deck is you get to play 8 good 1-mana creatures, which outside of White Weenie, I don't think a lot of decks have 8 good 1-mana creatures. Maybe the Werewolf deck now with the Tenacious Pup, but Champion of the Perished is one of the best 1-drops if it's in a deck that's enabling it. Shambling Ghast is also great. I don't have any Deadly Disputes, which you usually see with Shambling Ghast, because I thought that they were a little bit clunky with what the rest of the deck was trying to do. It's not really a sack deck. There are a couple of things that are going to cause you to sack your creatures, but it's not a primary focus of the deck. That's why I don't have Deadly Dispute. 3 copies of Jadar, which isn't a zombie, but it brings along a zombie token, and getting the zombie token every turn helps you trigger Champion of the Perished more. It also gives you something you can sack that will replace itself, so that's pretty nice. Tainted Adversary is part of a cycle of adversaries that are all pretty good creatures. This is maybe not the best of them, but it is a strong card. 2/3 Death Touch for 2 mana. Not great, but not horrible. And then if you have additional mana to sink into it, it grows and it brings along a lot of additional power because you can get twice as many 2/2 black zombie tokens as the number of times you pay the kind of kicker cost with it. So you can grow your Champion of the Perished a ton with it. You can also just build a super wide board that your opponent's not going to be able to block all your creatures next turn. Great card. Vanishing Verse, obviously just an excellent 2-mana removal spell. It's one of the reasons to play white. It helps you a lot in, like, if you play against Old Growth Troll, this is an exceptionally good card. If you play against the kind of mono-black sack deck that has Lolth, this is a great answer to mono-colored Planeswalkers. So just excellent card. Here's the first of the Alchemy cards, Ominous Traveler, which I gotta say, in all of Magic, pretty much if you have Traveler in your name, something bad is going on. There are no like friendly Traveler cards, really. There's the Doom Traveler, there's Ominous Traveler. Not that important to the functionality of the card, but it does seem like it's bad if you receive a visitor in the Magic world. So this thing is a 2/2. When it comes into play, it's a 1/1, but you also get to seek a card from its spellbook. And when you cast the card that you got from the spellbook, it's going to go back to your hand. So you can repeatedly get cards from the spellbook. And you also have this 2-mana 1/1 that's bouncing back and forth between your hand and play. So it's how good it is, it's going to depend a lot on what you're getting from the spellbook. This one has a really weird spellbook. It's a tribal spellbook, but it features a variety of tribes, which made it not a very good card in other decks I tried. But this deck has a zombie deck with a little bit of vampires, and those are 2 of the tribes. So we're hitting more of the tribal synergies. Let's go through the spellbook. Dominating Vampire. You're not really going to have enough vampires to make this do much. You can steal a token with it. You might have one other vampire, so you can maybe steal a 1-drop. Not one of the better choices to get. Vampire Socialite, so it's a 2/2 menace. And when it comes into play, it does put +1/+1 counters on other vampires you control, which there's the Welcoming Vampire and Henrika. So you might get 1 or 2 counters out of it, which is pretty great. Stromkirk Blood Thief. This one, it's not really a vampire tribal card because it just works with any damage you deal. So just not a great card on rate, but not an awful card, and you don't need any special synergies for it, so it's probably about average for the spellbook here. The Pit Fighter, a 1-mana 2/1 that allows you to sack it to draw cards. This card is another card that it's not exactly a tribal card, because if you have made your opponent lose life so you can activate the ability, you can always sack this to itself. You don't need any other vampires. So an okay option and not really that tribal themed. All right, here we go. Here is a tribal card, and it's worth noting that the cards you draft you can cast with any color of mana. So even though this is a green card, it's castable. But this is just a werewolf, so it's just a big dumb creature in this deck. You don't really have any werewolf synergies. You're just going to be playing 6 mana for a 5/4. If you have a lot of mana, you might want this, but in general, this card is extremely inefficient for this deck. Alpac Piper. This is a really cool card that allows you to put things into play, but it does not synergize at all with this deck. So I would say this is one that you're rarely actually going to want. Tovalar, another just great card in a wolf or werewolf deck. Doesn't work very well with this deck, so probably not going to want this one. Spirit card, probably not going to want this one. Another spirit card, you definitely don't want this one because this one really does not work very well in this deck. Another spirit card that is just a pretty bad card in general and doesn't work in the deck at all. Another spirit card. This one at least, I mean, it's a 3/3 flyer. It's pretty bad, but yeah, it is just bad. Okay, here's where we kind of get to the payoffs, though. Some of the vampire cards were decent. The zombie cards are going to fit perfectly in this deck because it's a zombie deck, and this is a good zombie card. A lot of people will just play this in their main deck of a zombie deck. I think it's a little bit weak. I think it's worse than the Headless Rider, but it is still a pretty good zombie. You're certainly happy to be getting it sort of for free or as an additional bonus to casting the Ominous Traveler. Champion of the Parish, it's a card that there's 4 copies of in the main deck, so obviously it's just a great card for the deck. This is one of the absolute best cards to get. Headless Rider, it's another card that is actually in the deck, so great card to get. Blade Stitch Scab, not castable because we're not a blue-black deck, but it is a lord for the primary tribe of the deck. So all of the zombie cards from the spellbook are great hits. And there's 4 zombie cards in the spellbook. So you're going to get something you're happy with the very first time on this card. I would say maybe half the time. And if you get something that isn't particularly good, you're still getting a creature, and a lot of the creatures are going to trigger the Welcoming Vampire, or they're going to be something you could sack to Henrika or to Fell Stinger. So just getting extra creatures is good in this deck, I would say. So that's one of the new cards, fun card. It's not the most powerful card from Alchemy for sure, but it does synergize really well with the deck. Going through the rest of the main deck really quickly. 4 Fell Stingers. It's a good zombie, and there's plenty of sack fodder. A Headless Rider, which I used to play more Headless Riders. I've trimmed them to make room for other things. The problem with this card is it's really bad against Spikefield Hazard, but it is really powerful if you've got a board full of a bunch of zombies. Welcoming Vampire, which is not a zombie, but it's a really, really powerful effect to have on a creature. If you get to the point where you're drawing a card a turn from this, it is a big deal. 3 Agadeem's Awakenings. I think this is the best Agadeem's Awakening deck I've ever played, because you've got a ton of comes into play abilities. You've got a ton of sack stuff in your deck. So you're going to have a juicy graveyard. And when you play this, if you're going to get, 3, maybe 4 creatures back, and you're probably going to get a lot of beneficial triggers when that happens, in addition to just getting all the bodies. Really great in this deck. I highly recommend playing at least 3 copies of it. 4 Henrikas. I've said this in a previous video about Mono Black Sack. I think this is a great card. I think if you're a black creature deck and you've got, some stuff you don't mind sacking, this is just a perfect card for that deck. And then here's one of, I think, the big payoffs for playing this deck. I just have a main deck Crippling Fear. If you play against one of those Inquisitor Captain decks, it's going to be a great card for you. You also might play against like a vampire deck where it's going to kill all their creatures. Even against mono green or werewolves, you're probably going to kill almost all, if not all, of your creatures. So just having a tribal deck that is playing Crippling Fear is great, because you're you do kill some of your own creatures because you have sort of a mix of tribes, but you're primarily going to name zombie, and you're going to have a bunch of zombies. Or you might name vampires if you have a couple vampires in play. Either way, this card should be great for you if you get to cast it in a creature matchup. And when we move on to the sideboard, I've got 3 more copies in the sideboard because I think that this is... Crippling Fear is the payoff for playing this style of deck, for sure. Going through the lands, there's kind of the 8 good dual lands, 3 creature lands, some basics, and then 2 of the new Forsaken Crossroads from Alchemy. I think that including a few of these in any 2 or 3 color deck is pretty standard in Alchemy. If you're wondering how to spend your wild cards in Alchemy, I would say craft a couple of these. You probably don't need to craft a full play set, but I think this card, you're going to find that it works well in a wide variety of decks. So I'd be happy to have, a couple of these in my collection for sure. Going through the sideboard, it's a black deck, so this is kind of a typical black deck sideboard. We've got Duresses, we've got Go Blanks. Those are obviously primarily in case you play against a blue deck. There's also 1 Thalia, which you can board in against a blue deck. Just Thalia is a very annoying card for them, and it kind of fits into what the deck does because the deck is almost entirely creatures, and it's just an aggressive 2-drop. Generally, against the blue decks, you want to board in discard. You want to make your deck a little bit more aggressive. And Thalia makes your deck a little bit more aggressive and also gives you some disruption. It does make your discard more expensive, which is a little bit awkward, but you can either work around that by sequencing your spells in a good order if you already have the Thalia, or your opponent's probably going to kill the Thalia if they can when you play it. So just after they kill it, you play the discard. Then we've got creature removal, like I said, the 3 Crippling Fears. 1 new card, Sap Vitality. I'm not really sure about this card yet. It seems like it'd be great in, just a creature-heavy deck that wants to kill opponents' creatures, especially a deck that has primarily small creatures, because +3/+0 is a massive buff to give to a card. That said, it's really hard to justify playing removal that isn't Infernal Grasp or Power Word Kill, because Infernal Grasp just always kills what you need to kill. And Power Word Kill doesn't work against dragons, but it kills almost everything you need to kill. So I've got a mix. I'm going to kind of, over time, see which I prefer. Probably it's good to have some options in your sideboard because you do have 4 Vanishing Verses in your main deck, so you're not going to want... You don't need to be able to board in all of your creature removal spells in every creature matchup. Just having access to the right ones in a particular matchup is worth a lot. So having a mix is good. I'm not sure that this is the best mix, but I wanted to try all these. Also have 1 copy of Bloodchief's Thirst, which is sort of for the same reason you want to have access to a mix of removal when you sideboard. I also think it's really nice to have access to at least 1 cheap removal spell, so you're boarding in a 1-mana card. Just in general in Magic, it's very important to get to a turn where you're able to do multiple things in a turn, and 1-mana removal spells that are good in a matchup is one of the easiest ways to get to that point. So I'm happy to have 1 Bloodchief's Thirst. I could see playing more of that. It really, once Alchemy settles down, maybe it'll be easier to decide which are the best removal spells. I kind of think Alchemy is going to remain fairly wide open though, so just having a mix and being able to pick the best ones to board in the matchup is pretty important. With that, let's jump into some of the games. On the play. Good hand. I'm a turn 1 Champion of the Perished. All your best hands are going to start with the turn 1 Champion of the Perished. So I got a choice here. I can draft from the spellbook with the Ominous Traveler, but I think I'm just going to play the 2/3. The 2/3 puts a counter on the Champion of the Perished and just puts more power on the board. I'm essentially putting 3 additional power on the board, and I'm dealing 1 additional damage that turn. So I think that's pretty clearly the way to go. Circle of Confinement, alright. We'll see if they have another answer to the Welcoming Vampire. If they don't, I'm going to start getting a lot of card advantage. Ooh, they do. Alright, what do you got for me, Ominous Traveler? Not the best options. I guess I'll just go with the Pit Fighter. And I think I'll play a Shambling Ghast too. Doesn't seem like my opponent has a deck that's really designed to pressure my life total. Oh, it's just an enchantment deck. Cool. Well, sadly for the opponent, I have a way to destroy their enchantment. Oh, Headless Rider. All right. Okay. Are they going to confine the Ominous Traveler? No. So this is not a very good board for Crippling Fear. I have 3 different creatures, so I'm not going to do that. I will, however, put this thing into play. Get my Traveler back. They're probably just going to block the Pit Fighter, but if for some reason they wanted to block the Shambling Ghast, I would get a zombie token. Now I have just 3 zombies in play, so Crippling Fear would potentially be very good. Although it doesn't seem like I'm playing against a deck with that many creatures in it. I'm just playing against a Circle of Confinement tribal deck. Interesting. Alright. Probably no reason you would ever need to have 2 Ominous Travelers. Should I get Tovalar? It hits harder. I think I'm just going to get the Pit Fighter because I'm going to play it this turn. I don't want to put both Ominous Travelers in play and have them somehow die to a sweeper. I don't know what this card does. I guess they can gain 3 life a turn right now. If I want to, I can sack the Pit Fighter to cycle away Crippling Fear. They're going to be at 8, and I'm attacking for 5 potentially next turn. I guess with the Hive of the Eye Tyrant, it's 8, so I probably shouldn't cycle this away. Now they're gaining even more life. But as we can see, the Ominous Traveler has been really strong this game. I've gotten, what, 4 creatures out of it? 2 Pit Fighters, an Archghoul of Thraben, and a Headless Rider. So you have to keep adding to the board pretty aggressively because they're gaining 6 life a turn now. Alright, another excellent hit. So I deal more damage if I have the Blade Stitch Scab in play before I attack, even though it's going to put the Ominous Traveler back in my hand. I'll play the Welcoming Vampire, so I get a card. Oh, they gain life, though. Yeah. It's fine, I guess. Opponent's really gaining an impressive amount of life a turn. (9/9). Yikes. I really need to draw a Vanishing Verse. Oh, and they're drawing 2 cards a turn now? Excellent. Yep, they're dead. I can play a creature, Henrika makes them sack their Catilda, and they take enough damage to kill them. That was an interesting game. So Thalia seems good against their deck. I want all my Vanishing Verses. What don't I want? Headless Rider seems pretty weak. They had only removal that exiled. And Crippling Fear seems awful. I could just board in a Duress. Wouldn't be the worst thing. The Shambling Ghasts are pretty bad too. They don't seem to have small creatures, so let's just have a lot of Duresses. Do I want to have a go blank? Or do I want another card that kills Catilda? I'll just have another card that kills Catilda. They also had Ranger class, so they might have some more creatures I haven't seen yet. Kind of weird. I have a turn 1 Champion of the Parish, but I don't have any other zombies. A little bit of a strange draw. Sometimes it makes sense to hold the Welcoming Vampire and play it on a turn where you're going to get to trigger it right away. So I could, in theory, do that by not playing the champion on the first turn. I think I'm giving up a lot of damage to do that because it means I'm not going to play the champion on the first turn. I'm not going to play the Welcoming Vampire on the third turn. I think I'm just going to have my hand curve out, and we'll see when it comes to turn 3 if I still want to play the Welcoming Vampire. They also just have a lot of Circles of Confinement. So this Vanishing Verse is a card I can use to get rid of a Circle of Confinement if I want one of my creatures back, but I think there's also more important targets for it. So we'll have to see how the game develops. If they don't get the Welcoming Vampire off the board, I'll get to draw a card from casting Henrika, and I'll get to draw a card from Henrika at the start of combat. It's tempting to Vanishing Verse the wedding announcement. It is doing a lot for them, but I think I need to get the Hollowed Haunting off the board. I guess let's start out by duressing them and seeing what they have in their hand. This is a cast trigger, right? Yes. So if I wait, they're maybe going to get a 4/4. I don't think there's a need to wait, given that I have the second Vanishing Verse. Probably they're just going to play Catilda on their turn, and I'm going to Vanishing Verse it. But if somehow they drew a different card, or I guess they're not, they're going to get to put the Catilda into play for free if they want. They did scry to the top. So they're actually dead because I can attack them for 5 in the air. I take 3, but I'm going to Fell Stinger them for lethal. I even have the Thalia in play, so they couldn't even play like if they had a 1-mana card that gained them life. No 1-drop this time, but 2, 3, 4 curves. Obviously a keep. This is a black-red deck, so it seems to be a vampire deck. Might just be a burn deck. We'll have to see. I'll take the hit here. This thing is about to grow to a 2/2. I will leave it back because if they play a removal spell to get the adversary out of the way, I am just going to trade my Champion of the Parish with their bloodthirsty adversary. It's a lot of beatdowns. Not attacking there, I think, pretty clearly worked out well for me. Another good blocker. Let's see if they have another removal spell. I do need Henrika to probably live to trade with the Blood Vial Purveyor. So they're going to hit me for some trample, but I do get this. It's a pretty good trade for me. The Florian is a bit of a problem. I don't really have a good way to block it yet. I'm going to try to trade as aggressively as I possibly can and just build it up to an Agadeem's Awakening. So you can play this as a 3/4. Which does make it a very strong blocker. I suppose I'm just going to do that and give up on the Agadeem's Awakening. I get to draw a card with the Welcoming Vampire. I think I could have had a setting where I could have stacked these differently so I could see the card before I decide. But it doesn't really matter. Okay. Thing's kind of annoying. They also have the ability to generate blood, which could matter. Suppose I should just kill the Pit Fighter with the Fell Stinger Shambling Ghast combo. But maybe I'll draw something better. Nope. This is one of those matchups where Vanishing Verse is not at its best because they have so many gold creatures. Florian is clearly the card I would most like to kill right now. It's another gold creature that is a very big problem for me. I don't think I'm ever going to want to play a second Fell Stinger, but do I really need 2 Hive of the Eye Tyrants? Probably not. Obviously, I'm going to play Crippling Fear. I'm just trying to think, is there any reason other than just to do it right now? And I don't think there is. And also, I'm thinking about what am I going to do about this Den of the Bugbear? Whoa, you were supposed to save your Immerstorm Predator. All right. Given that they didn't save their Immerstorm Predator, they're they're doomed. They needed to sack something in response. And I think that they realized that. I wasn't in good shape, I think, if they did sack something. So here, I think this is a great matchup for Crippling Fear. They're mostly small vampires. That said, should I be boarding out vampires because I'm boarding in Crippling Fear? I don't think I need to do that. I'm not a huge fan of Jadar in these creature matchups because it blocks so poorly. And I also don't really like Fellstinger because you don't necessarily want to give up that much tempo, both by dealing yourself 2 and by having to sack something. It also lines up really poorly against Florian because Florian has first strike. I guess the other question is, should I cut a Vanishing Verse for an Infernal Grasp? And I think I will do that. I think we'll cut another Vanishing Verse for a Bloodchief's Thirst. They had the Blood Vial Purveyor that this kills, but other than that, it seemed like they mostly just had 1 and 2 mana cards that it kills. The Immerstorm Predator is a bit of a problem. I am able to get it off the board if I can get them down to it being the only creature, and then I play a Henrika. And I did just board in a lot of removal, so that is a line I can play towards if I'm worried about an Immerstorm Predator. I did say I like this card a lot as just a general dual land. I'm not sure that it makes much sense to put it in a vampire deck because you already have the Valdaran Estate to go along with your other dual lands. Maybe I should just play this. Let's see who the Traveler's bringing with him. Hopefully it's a Champion of the Perished. It is. Excellent. I'll leave the Shambling Ghast back to potentially block this turn. One thing I have to be careful about in this matchup is Vampire's Vengeance. It's kind of their version of Crippling Fear. Citywide Connoisseur. Or City Stalker Connoisseur. Okay. See if they're going to kill the Champion of the Perished. Not as of yet. I think I'm going to hold this for a turn. Doesn't really help me to get this to 4 because it still dies to the Blood Tithe Harvester, and it would still die to the City Stalker Connoisseur. I think if my opponent knew that how many Crippling Fears I had in my deck, they would definitely just Blood Tithe Harvester. What do you got for me, Ominous Traveler? Another Champion of the Perished or a Blade Stitched Scab? Blade Stitched Scab is pretty interesting, actually. Let's go for that one. Should I attack? I could attack. They would probably block with the Trespasser, and then I would have to discard a card to kill it, which I don't think I want to do. I think I'm just going to play the Shambling Ghast because it makes the Champion of the Perished 5 toughness, which means that they can't immediately kill it with the Blood Tithe Harvester. They can kill it if they want to use their Valdaran Estate, but that requires a lot of their mana on their turn. I don't think I need to force trades right now because I am drawing to 4 Crippling Fears. So having all of my creatures to stay in play is good for me. Certainly if they attack, I will block and trade in that fashion. But I don't need to do anything to make it not be just a big board for the time being. Now, that's kind of scary. What do you got for me this time? The Archghoul of Thraben would be nice. And another Blade Stitch Scab, not the worst. I think I'm just going to attack with all my Shambling Ghasts this turn. Alright, dealt all damage. I'm exposing the Traveler this way. They only have 1 card in their hand. And I'm under some pressure to end the game now because of the Immerstorm Predator. It will kill me in 3 turns, I guess. A Florian, yuck. Seems like they should definitely attack. Gonna have to attack even more aggressively next turn. Ooh, a Nighthawk Scavenger. Ugh. Come on, Crippling Fear. Crippling Fear wins the game. Alright, I guess I can just let the Ominous Traveler die, but why would I? The Ominous Traveler did so much for me this game. We'll save it from the Crippling Fear. And that's why this deck can be really, really good in creature matchups. Well, that's it for today. Thanks everybody for watching. And if you stuck along for this much of the video, please go ahead and like it and subscribe. It does help me out a lot. I'm trying to grow the channel. And the more I can grow it, the more videos there's going to be. See you next time.